All right, now it says live.
Now we are live. All right.
Now we're live.
We're here with Mr. Jared Osborne. He's been watching me play Our House Around the House, you know.
Second Saturday in a row, we're getting together and talking comics.
And right off the bat, Mr. Anthony Purdue, if he's showing up in the comments, has messed with us. He's commenting, and I was like, "Are we live? Do I have pants on?" You know. All right. Well, Jared, you went for a bike ride this morning. So is everybody doing their social distancing up there?
Everybody, yeah. It's funny. When I do my bike ride, which is usually early in the morning, I often see the same people. I'm usually the only bike rider during the winter. But you see the usual joggers and walkers out there. So, and we always, and now there's even more people out there because everybody's home. So it's funny. See, it's like even with my usual guys, I check who's behind me, and I move a little bit more out into the street as it passes, but we still give our nods hello. But it's like the new people who aren't used to it, like, avert their eyes. They don't know you're supposed to nod hello as you go by with the walkers and joggers.
I will say that the couple times I've been up north and actually lived up north a little bit, the socialization was very different.
Yeah. I think that's New York City a lot too.
Yeah.
Only because like I always say, and when you're in a small town or whatever, it's the polite thing to do to say hello to someone as you go by. Even if you don't have a conversation with them, you nod your head, you say hello. But when you're in the middle of Manhattan and there's thousands and thousands of people around, you can't nod and say hello to anyone. So the polite thing to do is to just let everybody walk. You don't even acknowledge anyone else around you.
Yeah. So
it's like when those two politenesses clash, when it's like one goes to the other, and it's like, I can only imagine what it's like to be a tourist in New York City. And for the first time in your life, there's 1,000 people passing you in a minute. You're like, and nobody's talking to each other unless.
Well, we have the interstate highway here, Interstate 77, and everybody from Canada, New York, Florida, it'll take you straight down the coast to Florida and stuff. So I've met all kinds of people, but you can tell the New Yorkers because they won't look at you. You know what I mean? And you can see and they will acknowledge a culture shock every now and then.
Because that's the polite thing to do in New York is you don't look at anybody. You don't. That's because you can't. And I always find it funny when I'm commuting into the city, and even commuting, there's those rules too, where I always find it crazy that here I'm commuting by train. I go through Jersey, then to Secaucus Junction, and then into Penn Station. And here I am surrounded by 1,000 other people getting the same train, and no one can talk to each other. It's like, that's just the rules. You can't have a polite conversation with the person standing next to you. You're not allowed unless something goes wrong.
It's like men at a urinal, in the bathroom.
Right. When something goes wrong, all of a sudden everybody starts talking to each other. And it's just so funny. It's like, and I'm like, wow, this is just so bizarre. Here I am standing there. I got 10 people on this side, 10 people on this side, waiting for a train, and we're all just like, everybody's on their phone these days too. I would occasionally, being an artist, I like to observe people. So I just occasionally, there's like one section I sit in, so like a little waiting area that occasionally I'll sit in. Maybe about 20 people are in there. And I like to count how many people are on their phone. And it's usually out of the 20 people, 15 are on their phone.
Yeah.
Maybe one or two has a book. Maybe one or two has a tablet. But usually out of the 20, there's 2 of us not on some kind of device. It's just like, wow. And that wasn't true just a few short years ago, 10 years ago.
Well, I've lived in Baltimore. I visited New York. I was in New York for a whole 20 minutes and a lot of time in New Jersey and stuff. But a couple years ago, when all the comic book YouTubers were doing the private chats to like dodge trolls and stuff, the people who ended up becoming the New York Warriors on their podcast, Okay, we would all be in there, and this went on for like 2 or 3 months. I caught myself going to work yelling at people, just normal talking. I'm hanging out with New Yorkers online, and I'm going to work, and I'm like yelling at people.
It's funny. I was out to name drop again. One time I was went out to the diner. I was there. My friend Ed was there, who I've known since college. He also worked at Marvel with me. He's a comic book guy. Walt Simonson was there, and my sister was there. And Walt is a talker. I don't know if you probably met. I know you've met. Well, Walt can talk and talk and talk, and I can talk and talk and talk, and Ed can talk and talk and talk. And so we were just sitting there going ba 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 back and forth the whole time. And my sister is just sitting there going. And we get done, and she's like, "When do you guys know when to speak?" And it's like, well, you just have to get into the rhythm of it.
My guess are comic book conventions are probably not going to happen this year. I mean, just a guess. But I'm telling you right now, if I end up at another comic book convention and Walt Simonson's there and I'm up there instead of talking about Moorcock and Elric, I'm dropping your name this time. I'm going to have my phone with one of our videos up here. Okay. I'm telling the truth, So, but
that's how New Yorkers talk. Let's talk and talk, which is why you can't talk to everybody when there's 1,000 of you out on the street.
Oh yeah, man. Well, I tell you what, we got some people here finally.
Let's see who's talking on here.
Oh, we got Surly John. We got Surly Tim, his fun bunker. He lived in a medium-sized college town. People think he's from New York. That's hilarious. Okay. But one of the things I think I found pretty interesting because, I'm still waiting for the coffee to hit. I think we'll call it quarantine so we don't get pulled off here. Might be like affecting me a little bit, stuff like that. But one of the things that really kind of got me that you were talking about, I was like, what are we going to talk about? Because we're just going to hang, But I loved the idea of how you were talking about pulling some books out to read, and you can't believe how much time has gone by. And I'm sitting here hanging a picture, yelling, "I'm with you. I know exactly what you're talking about." It's amazing how I think one of the first books that's popping in my head that did that to me was around the time where I think it was last year, and I was flipping out because The Blackest Night happened in 2009. And I remember that like yesterday. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
I can pull out some image books and stuff and cannot believe it was like from the 90s. There's some Astro City stories. I'm sure I can go on. But you found a book that you thought was 2002 and it was actually 1986.
Yeah, I could have sworn it came out in the early 2000s. Joe Kupert's Facts from Sarajevo. And I thought 15 years was a long time, since I read it. And it turned out to be 1996, 20. And I'm like, wow, how can I be that off?
All right.
But I actually have a what's funny. This is what this is an idea I discovered years and years ago, and it's more true now. Is that first we measured time. We used to have easy measures of time when we were younger because we measure and remember time by what grade we were in.
What grade we're in, and for me, it was the fall season of New Saturday Morning Cartoons.
Right, you can remember you relate the cartoons to the grade too. Right. You can remember what grade, and that lasts all the way through high school or college. You can remember stuff, and then you get out. Maybe you got a few years. You're doing whatever. Maybe you're starting a new job. You can remember things by jobs too, but sometimes those last a long time.
Right.
But once you start having kids, you remember things by your kid's age.
Yeah.
And you remember things by your kid's grade. I never had kids. So it's like my sense of time got so distorted after I was like 30, because all of a sudden the normal markers people have for measuring time, I never got married either. And people measure time by before they were married, after they were married. So it's like my sense of time is so distorted now. There was a time, like when I was in probably maybe 10 or 15 years ago, everything seemed to have happened 3 to 5 years ago. I'd say, when did that happen? 3 to 5 years ago. That it was like that for 10 years. But now that I'm in my early 50s, even that's gone. I just have 3 to 5 years ago is meaningless to me when I find out that, this book I just read came out 24 years ago that I've been meaning to reread for 24 years.
Yeah. I got a video from like, I don't know what it was, 2011, 12 or something. I can't remember what it's called, but it's got cookie dough in the title. And I've been described as doing a Dr. Manhattan thing where I hold up the book and I tell you what was going on around my life at the time.
Right.
I'm actually one of those people that a comic book will make me remember things measured in time, right? Well, something's happened to where around 2009 that's kind of gone away.
Yeah.
That seems to be the cutoff date. So I'll pick up these books now and can't believe that it was like Astro City, I can't believe started in 1995. I followed that book as it came out every month sporadically over 25 years apparently. And that blew my mind. I'm like, that's some dedication, but it didn't feel like work. And then you can read something in the 80s and stuff that or you read as a kid. So that's the one that kind of like throws me back. I'll be looking at this and it kind of surprises me how the artwork can still be fresh, but you can still see some you can still like see some fashion in it that you're like, whoa, and then the advertisements in it and stuff take me back. I love seeing the old He-Man Atari. I think one of my favorite, for some reason, one of the things that cracks me up is when you look on the back of your book, you'll see the Atari He-Man video game for the 2600. Now that the video games and the cartoons will take me back like you're talking about at that moment, the other way around. Right. So what you been reading there? I think you were talking about you were starting to read some stuff or something. Or
I just read something. Well, I finished reading Facts from Sarajevo and Safe Area Garajda, which were both tough reads because they're about the war in Bosnia, but they're really good. And it's like I said, I think it's the one A-level Joe Kubert work. Because my thoughts on Joe Kubert are, I think he's an A-level talent who was always on B-level comics, just because that was his career. He was, he didn't have great writing on all his comics. I love his Sergeant. The best thing about any Joe Kubert comic is always the Joe Kubert artwork. Yeah. But I think Facts from Sarajevo is actually an A-level comic, so I really enjoyed rereading it, even though it's tough to read because it's man's inhumanity to man, especially with quarantine going on. You're like, oh my goodness, could this place ever get as bad as Bosnia in the early 90s? And you believe it can. And you're like, holy, because if everything breaks down, crazy stuff can happen. And then I just picked up, I just put the Hoopla app on my iPad, which in case anybody out there doesn't know what Hoopla is, it's an app that partners with your local library. And you can download books and borrow books. And I think you can borrow like 10 graphic novels a month or something. Then I discovered that they have ones that don't, like the one I just downloaded, Blade Runner 2019, I think is the name of it. I've seen it on the stands.
2049?
No, I think it's called not 29. I'm not positive. Whatever the latest Blade, because it takes place in the original Blade Runner timeline. How's everyone doing out there? John, how you doing?
Hey, what's up, guys? I've actually got the first issue of that here. Now, okay. Yeah, no, you're right. Blade Runner 2019. So
okay, it was okay.
Apparently it's taking place in the one with Harrison Ford, I guess.
Right, that movie timeline. I never watched Blade Runner 2049, so I don't know that one. But I really like the original Blade Runner movie. Well, this one is very much about plot and mood, so it was noir-ish. It was solidly done.
Yeah, I love the Blade Runner stuff, man. Yeah, I like it so much. It's always fun. God, something that's going to bounce off you there. Going back to Joe Kubert, if you'll humor me here and stuff, like Joe Kubert was very interesting because he's one of those guys I thought his art was ugly. The first time I really noticed Joe Kubert was when they had a Justice League and All-Star Squadron crossover, like in 82, 83.
Oh, yeah.
And all of a sudden I go down this rabbit hole over the years, like, God, I would try to draw, covers and stuff. And Kubert was that guy where I first started figuring out, like, he does know what he's doing. I knew nothing about him at 9 years old. But, like, all of a sudden it's like to draw his stuff, you're like, you got to be slightly above looking down on something or slightly subtle. And then I started going down the rabbit hole with him over years, and I was like, this man's a genius.
Yeah.
But it was his Tor stuff. To me, I remember him being like, him and Nick Cardy would do the greatest ambush covers, like on Sergeant Rock.
Yes.
An ambush cover for you guys is where, like, you can tell you're at that moment right before something terrible happens to the hero. Like Sergeant Rock and them saying, I think the war is over, guys. We're good. Meanwhile, there's a bunch of Nazis waiting for him behind a busted up wall.
Those Sergeant Rock covers are brilliant.
Yeah. So yeah, Kubert. Yeah, but going down the well with Kubert and stuff, I've done that rabbit hole with him. I mean, he's just amazing.
His superhero stuff could be ugly, like you said, though, because he didn't pretty everyone up. His superheroes were kind of grounded, and he's used to drawing dirt and grit on everything. And it's kind of like his superheroes still had that same line that he used on Sergeant Rock. So I remember seeing like his JLA stuff and things. I'd be like, ooh, this is not the shiny JLA.
Well, for people that don't remember, George Perez was doing the Justice League covers, and then the two All-Star Squadron covers were by Kubert. And if you compare the two, it's not fair if you don't know anything about just from like buying it. But his Tor stuff, his Caveman Tor stuff, is like my absolute favorite of everything he does. I mean, the way he draws if you've never read the book, I mean, you are suffering with him. There's an Adult Swim cartoon called Primal, and it's got like a caveman named Spear and a dinosaur named Fang. And you need to check it out because I feel like they pulled from Kubert, whether we know it or not. I mean, it's got that. It's just Primal is the way to do it. You can set a mood. Oh man, we got more and more people in here. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. We got Mastodon. Let me go up here a little bit. Shirley Tim, Gene Colan. Let's talk about Gene Colan out there. My dealer just went to my books to get. My dealer just sent my books to me, but I'm more interested in reading the collected Rogue Trooper. Mastodon is there. I saw Gore Vidal there.
Yep, giving us some book recommendations for quarantine reading. I Am Legend, Day of the Triffids. Oh, some disaster books.
Yeah, I'm Legend. Richard Matt.
I've never read either of those.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I think it was a book from the 50s. I think I read it in high school. Yeah.
Marvel 1602. A couple of people are rereading. I actually was. First of all, I'm not a Neil Gaiman fan. Not because I think he's a bad writer. I think he's a good writer. He just doesn't particularly write about stuff I'm interested in. That's all. I mean, I'm not a Sandman fan just because I'm just not interested in his topics for whatever. He's got a lot of stuff about living embodiments of stuff and angels and heaven and hell. And I just don't find that very interesting. So I usually don't read that much Neil Gaiman. And I remember when 1602 came out, I just wanted to read it. I was still at Marvel then, so I got it for free.
Nice.
And at first, I liked it because I thought he was doing something new and different. Because I remember reading the first issue and saying, you have to. One of the things I thought that was interesting about it was, you had to have some knowledge of the Marvel universe in the beginning of it. It's like he was not holding anyone's hand in 1602. He was throwing in some interesting themes and some interesting stuff and doing new stuff with the characters that I thought was kind of an interesting idea, in that he was writing this for people who were very familiar with at least who the Marvel characters are, which not every comic is. So he was starting. Most comics are to a certain extent, but he was really taking it further. Mm-hmm. But then by issue 3, it kind of degraded for me into, guess who this superhero guess who this guy secretly is? Guess who that secretly is? Guess who that secretly is? So it was just kind of like he kind of stopped that theme and just kind of ended up, using the Marvel characters in secret, it's as if they had secret identities. So I just became like disappointed in it. But the one thing I did like about it was his idea that they were all searching for the Holy Grail.
Yeah.
And what the Holy Grail actually was interesting. I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't read it in the last 15 years. But.
Yeah, I mean, we got somebody saying they're just now reading it. So yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, he said he's already finished it, but it's no biggie. But my thing is that amazingly enough, with Neil Gaiman, I haven't liked any of his Marvel stuff.
Yeah.
The 1602 thing, we got some of the similar thoughts around the same issues and stuff. It started out with like setting up a plot. It was like Act 1 was good if we put it in 3 acts. Act 1 was really good, introducing things. I actually felt like I should go back and read the X-Men books where they brought in a Conan sorcerer. And they turned Manhattan into the Hyborian Age. You know what I mean?
They just reprinted that.
I can't
in
believe
an X-Men special comic like 2 months ago.
Yeah, I can't believe people are going back to that. I remember when and that's one of those books. I can't believe that was around 85 because it seems like I remember that being in a 3-pack for $1 when I was like, 82. That blows my mind, that it's not that long ago for that. I've got completely wrong when that book came out. It just feels that way. But that book was everywhere. That was the Peter Frampton I'm Alive album of the 70s of comics in the 80s. Everybody had that. It was in all these 3-to-1 packs. They were really pushing it. I don't know. But anyway, but anything Neil Gaiman's done at Marvel hasn't clicked with me. The Last Temptation of Alice Cooper wasn't even his plot. His Eternals was boring. But he can do a few things at DC, and majority of it I'm digging. I get it. But the 1602 thing, it turned into, I agree with you. It started out with Act 1 giving us a plot, searching for the Holy Grail that fits, the Crusade thing. I was like, this is cool. And then all of a sudden it was like that he was trying to shoehorn some characters in there so he had all the Marvel universe. X-Men made no sense being in that book. I'll go ahead and just tell you the way they were handled. And then it's exactly what you were saying. It started getting into who is this and guess who that is. Well, that just means you can read it once and enjoy it the same way. When you rely on that too much and you have one reveal after the other, I was just sort of like, that's why I've never really reread it. I read it one time through, and I loved what they did with Captain America. Just put that out there. That was cool. But that was about it. By the time we got to the end of it, I'm like, I'll never be reading this again. I'm like, 16 year, the era was a character all of its own. And to me, that's a pitfall when you make the era a character.
Right.
Stranger Things season 3, that's why it's not as good as the other two. It's like the 80s has become its own character in it,
Right. You're mentioning 3-packs just made me flash back to my childhood. I used to get the 3-packs when we were away on vacation. We'd go up to Lake Placid camping, and what was this? Ames was the name of the department store we'd go to, and that's where I'd get my. We would go into town sometimes. That's where I get my 3-packs from. I remember, trying to look at what the comic in the middle of the 3-pack was. But as time went on and the story got a little more run down, they used to have kids. They'd tear open the 3-packs. I guess they just read them in the store.
Yeah.
So I used to be like. So I'd take one of the open 3-packs and slip a few more comics in there. And I'd be like, I wonder if anyone's going to notice. They didn't care in the least. They just like checked it out. And I'd be like, well, no one can buy these comics. I'll just slip them. I'll just slip all these into the 3-pack and put them.
Well, if they didn't own the store, minimum wage was probably like $3.27 back then. So they were like, I don't care.
I remember being, nervous as a little kid doing that because I never shoplifted anything, but I was like, oh, well, it's not like you could buy them individually. But I see now that, those people at the checkouts, they didn't care. You hand them something, they check it out, check it out and just keep going.
Well,
I remember being real nervous, slipping extra comics in.
Well, I did that with some records. I'm not going to lie, But I think my big confession was I think I was like 6 or 7 years old, and I really wanted a pack of gum. And I ended up stealing the gum. And as soon as I walked out of the store with the gum, I'm like, "That's it. I'm going to hell." I was like, I've done it. I mean, I'm 6 years in, and I've already screwed up. I can do whatever now. The gum is my downfall. That damn Bubba. I was like, Okay, man, they're getting into now. They're talking about all kinds of things to read. I mean,
Yeah.
Surly Tim's fun to bunk. I'm having a good time, Jared. We'll get to some comics here in a minute, I guess.
Yeah.
Haller, did you see that the 100-page exclusive has a Commandy story in it? It's actually on my shelf over here. There's a Strange Adventures 100-page giant. I got it just for that, and it has the real Legion of Superheroes in it by Dan Jurgens.
Yeah.
I'm not a Dan Jurgens fan, but I don't like slam his stuff. But I have a hard time looking at his art and reading things. It's real repetitive.
Okay.
Yeah. I've been reading the Marvel graphic novels and X-Men 2099. Not 2099 books.
Just
wow.
all the Marvel graphic novels? Because there were a lot of them.
Well, I don't know where Mastodon is from. If he's from England, a couple years ago, they were coming out with great the classic stories, Marvel stories like Dark Phoenix.
Okay. Yes.
They weren't coming out in order, and they were hardbound. But when you got a full shelf, it made the backs of the books make a collage.
Right.
Heroes. I never saw the completed thing, but they were real excited about that over there. John Jones, I've read Moonshadow based on Tim's recommendation. James DeMonte's Moonshadow is wonderful.
John J. Muth. Another one I haven't read since the 80s. I bought that as it came out, and I've always meant to reread and somehow never have. And there's a good new printing of it, I'm told.
Yeah, I actually had James DeMonte's. Is it DeMonte's? I mean, I learned these things by reading, so I know I eat them up. But he actually had him on Twitter, and I think I might have took him off Twitter just because. But he was really pushing the new publication. I didn't know he wrote a sequel to it. There's a sequel to Moonshadow. It might be called After Moonshadow. I don't know what it's called. He wrote a sequel to it, and my jaw dropped. I'm like, how did this happen? How did I not know about this? I mean, I'll order online through Gmart since 2002, and I go through every company, and I'm like, how did I miss this? I had no idea. But Moonshadow is fun. I mean, it really is a fun book. Your every issue is you might as well just read an issue, set an hour aside, and take a break. It is just packed and full and just great. I really like Marvel. Man, be patient with me, guys. Stream Duck is making my comments jump all over the place. Man, they're really jumping on here. Paulo Costa
says that's more true. I was talking about 1602. That's more true of the second mini than the first. Well, then I really don't want to read the second. If I thought that of the first.
Yeah, I ran from that when I saw it.
A little too much guessing who was the plot.
People reading Batman. Dave McKenzie, my favorite End of Time Cycles of Civilization novel is a canticle for Leibowitz. I've never read that. Mine is an Andre Norton novel from the late 50s called Starman's Son. I think that's a fantastic post-apocalyptic story.
Gore Vidal tells us first comics E-Man was wonderfully outrageous. Do I still have E-Man? I'm going to go over here and look at my data.
Oh, yeah. Red Vitamin Blue is out there. There was a great 3-pack story from Jared. The packs I got around 89 to 90 were giant cursive 2s written by some of the covers, and I never knew why. Written on giant 2s on the covers. Somebody's probably trying to say they were half off, trying to get rid of them.
I was buying, I think, the first comics Joe E-Man as they came out, but I think I must have gotten rid of them over the years.
I have met people that are vicious fans for those E-Man books, and I've got 2 or 3 here that I've had from the Stepdad's collection. I mean, it was a fun little book, but there's people who are just like, I mean, they love that book. Maybe I need to look it up a little bit. And Mythology of the Abandoned City by John J. Muth enchanted me when I read it in Epic Magazine. It still does. I kind of remember that because I was flipping through my
I just might pull off my shelf, too. I think it was John J. Muth did an adaptation of the movie M.
Yeah, I think so.
I was just looking for things on my shelf I should pull off, and that was one of them. I was like, I'll have to check that out. Pull out Moonshadow, too.
Oh, Moonshadow's wonderful. Moonshadow's one of those things that I'm sort of glad isn't as like popular as like Sandman and Alan Moore stuff. It's kind of nice to have something that hasn't been exploited, you know. All right, so we were kind of talking about backing up. There's no comics coming out and all that stuff right now because of, you know, the apocalypse going on here. So instead of like digging out all my old Daredevils, I have a short box that's way overpacked with them. I have quite a few of the Frank Miller Daredevils and stuff. I've been pulling out these Elektra Saga. It was a mini series, I think around 83, where they just kind of took all of Frank Miller's stuff out of the Daredevil books so you can follow her. And if you notice, he's pretty clever because if you know, the first issue has her pulling the sword. The second one has her jumping at you with the sword. The third one is her launching herself off the cover at you. And then the fourth one, I'm just assuming she's killed you. And she's thanking you for giving your soul to the hand. I don't know. So it's really cool to go back. I want to read this in his Ronin that came out.
I reread Ronin a few years ago. Yeah, I enjoyed that.
Yep.
It held up pretty well.
Oh, yeah. But what I mentioned to you about going through and looking at his artwork back in the day, we probably had the first appearance of Elektra in the house, but I'm like 8 years old. Kirby, I'm just now coming around to Kirby because of Thunder the Barbarian, because I recognized his designs on a little village of dwarves, you know, and I'm like, wait a minute. And then all of a sudden you go from those bright colors and the Superman and Legion of Superhero books that I was into in the Justice League, and then you see his dark, dreary, sketchy stuff when you're a kid. It just didn't appeal to me as a kid. So it blows my mind that I probably had like the first appearance of Elektra, and she was on fire in the comic book community back then. And I'm just sitting here like, have you seen Thundar?
Elektra.
Yeah, but well, like I mentioned to you, now that I'm, you know, years have gone by and all this stuff, I see so much Will Eisner in his work that I can't believe I didn't pick up on sooner. You know, I started noticing a lot of Will Eisner in his stuff in the 2000s when I started looking at. I read a bunch of Spirit in a row, a stack of Spirit, and then when I went back to Sin City, I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. But there's an actual. I don't know if you've read a lot of Spirit, Will Eisner, but he always had this thing where you got a lamppost and you would get a water grate on the ground, and it was just 4 bars making like a hashtag. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. He stuck that in there. He's got little Eisner pieces of scenery from the city and stuff just stuck all through in there. And I'm just like, that son of a bitch. You know, it's right there in front of me this whole time, you know.
Surly Tim, he says he got the deluxe volume of Ronin and is amazing. Read it for the first time a few months. Let me ask you, does the deluxe volume have the fold-out explosion? I always wondered, because when I reread, I had forgotten about that. And, and like the last issue of Ronin, there's a 4-page fold-out explosion. And I always wondered if any of the other versions did that.
My soft cover
they do, and sometimes they don't. What was that?
My soft cover does.
Oh, the soft cover even does. Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I mean, it's probably.
So the deluxe version must.
But Ronin, I tell you what, Ronin is one of those things where that book was way ahead of its time. No doubt in my mind. I think I actually blame Frank Miller for the big ninja trend in the 80s. No doubt in my mind. I mean,
the inverse law of ninjas, too.
Yes.
Have you ever heard of that?
No, but.
The inverse law of ninjas is, in any story, movie, comic book, if you see one ninja, watch out. He's the deadliest guy around. If you see a whole bunch of ninjas, they're cannon fodder. They're easy to take out. That's the inverse. So the more ninjas there are, the weaker they are. And that is definitely true in Frank Miller's Daredevil. Whenever all those ninjas would show up, they'd get their asses kicked. But when the one ninja guy would show up, it'd be like, ooh.
I think that's true for anything that has minions except for stormtroopers. You know? They've had one great stormtrooper ever. You know? Oh, man. They're talking about the 3 packs.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Captain Canuck. No, we didn't have Captain Canuck 3-packs here where I was in the U.S.
I'm not going to talk about it because I have one issue of Captain Canuck. I don't understand it, and I don't know if it's beloved or not. When I called Strodium Dog a ripoff of Judge Dredd, I got corrected, and I deserved it. I got corrected real quick. So if I don't know about it, I'm not saying too much about it. But yeah, that's the thing. I'm kind of backing up and reading here about the Elektra stuff. You got anything you want to show off there?
First, I have to mention Elektra Assassin and Amanda Connor.
Oh,
because I think while Bill Sienkiewicz was doing Elektra Assassin, Amanda Connor became his assistant.
Oh, wow.
So starting around the second issue, he started using Amanda as a model.
Oh, that's so cool.
And my a friend of mine I haven't looked at him in so long, but a friend of mine tells me by the end of the series, it is Amanda Connor. He's like she doesn't even look like Elektra anymore. She looks like Amanda. Yes.
Oh, that's hilarious. That's number 6. So I'm gonna be paying attention to that now. That's fantastic. Now I've met here's number 1. So yeah, I can kind of see what you're saying now that you pointed that out.
Yeah, I haven't looked at them since I learned that information, but
now you were like actually friends with her or something. I saw some pictures on your Facebook or something from the 90s or something with her.
Yeah, I actually I knew Amanda before I knew Amanda. My friend Steve Bunch, who I mentioned last week, who didn't know about the Avengers Defenders War somehow. And he was one of the most important behind the scenes guys in comics that nobody knows existed. I worked with him at Marvel. I went to SUNY Purchase with him too, college. That's where I met him in college. And he went to high school with Amanda Connor. So that when we were in college, Bunch would always tell us what Amanda's doing and show us some work by him, because this is back in the late 80s, before she had really done any professional work for Marvel or DC. So he'd always be like, "Oh, Amanda did this for that. Oh, Amanda," and he'd show us the work or whatever. So it's like I don't even remember when I first met her because I heard about her so much from Bunch beforehand. But I know I met her like when she was doing Barbie in the early 90s at Marvel. So she used to be up at Marvel all the time too. And I still have a few Barbies, which she did great covers on.
I'm sorry, my hot girlfriend walked by. It says she's going to the Star and she's in some tight jeans. What's going on here? What store are you going to?
Hey, if you're going to strut around in your short shorts, she's putting on her tight jeans.
No, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. You look all right. Hurry home. Bye-bye.
I love you.
Love you.
Love you from everyone.
Sorry you guys didn't see that, but I was like, damn. I have moments where I'm like, how did this happen? Have you seen me? Have you seen this? Sorry, man. I didn't. If you saw it, you would have totally understood. I know it's rude. But anyway, Amanda Connor doing the bar bands and stuff. It's really odd because you actually know her, and she's one of the few comic book people that I've gone to a con and met and stuff that I can see me hanging with her. She is so cool.
Oh yeah, she's very nice, very friendly.
We had this long talk where we talked about her before Watchmen stuff, probably about a year or two after Silk Spectre came out. I think that's her best work, and she was like giving me little inside clues about how she had band references. She told me about the research she did on the fashion for the 60s and all that stuff. We were actually talking about Mary Jane's shoes because so she gives me some hints and here and there about all this stuff about I'm going back like years, but she was talking about I pulled from a band here and a song there and stuff. So I went through it. She hid some stuff in there. And the next day at the con, after I went home and looked at stuff up, I came back. I skipped the whole line, walked up to her. She remembered me, knew what I was talking about, and the band. And she was like, "You got it." Like I was real impressed with how nice she was. You know what I mean? Yeah. I was like, I could see me hanging with her.
Right. She's very
So
nice.
cool.
But that just reminded me of talking about her fashions. One of the things I'll have to show you. It's still on my shelf. I haven't pulled it down in a decade and a half, but probably dusty. Look at all that dust on top. This is my
That's history, sir.
this is my
That's
file. This is my file for women's fashions.
Oh, that's
Because
awesome.
this was back when I was all commercial artists before the age of the internet, when you can just look something up, had what they call their morgues or their swipe file. And one of the things I was always aware of, and I kind of always criticized comic book art, especially my friends and guys were also learning. And if you is fashion, and like I said, Amanda was probably more of aware of it than most, being that she's a woman and they're more aware of fashion. But it was like I had a morgue file full of fashions I would draw in my characters, because like I said, most people, if you look at most comic book artists, when they draw regular clothes, matter of fact, I use that love shirt for one of my characters.
Oh, that's awesome.
When they draw regular clothes, they're generic regular clothes. So their superheroes are all exciting and have these bright costumes on, but then when they draw anybody in civilian clothing, it looks terrible, because they're drawing their idea of a shirt. They're not actually drawing a shirt. And that's what I had this file for, was so when I had to draw a shirt, I could look up an actual fashion shirt and draw that. And more artists should have done that, because and what's funny too, if you look at the like stuff from the 50s and the 60s, especially like early Creepy and Eerie, I was looking at recently, and all those art, a lot of them were from EC, and they could draw suits like nobody's business.
Well,
they were drawing suits all the time. You see guys draw suits now, superhero guys, they look terrible because they don't know what a suit looks like.
Well, you actually went somewhere I was going to go with it. My artist background stops at 22. I mean, I went for it, tried to make a living at it. No biggie. And I'm very humble about it. There's nothing to brag off. Right. There's just a unpolished guy here who's forgot more, didn't blossom with it. Not a big deal. No regrets. I'll play around with it. But it was hats. Trying to draw people with hats is what made me start. It really pushed me to try to figure out, wait a minute, how does something as simple as how does a hat sit on the head? Because it sits. A lot of people try to draw it like it's the top of the
head. You have to observe how a hat sits on someone's head in order to draw it.
Yeah. And I went back to the comic books, what you're talking about, specifically Kirby. Kirby, that's where I got how to draw a hat on somebody's head, was Kirby. You go back to those old Fantastic Four, Marvel Saga, Marvel Saga reprints.
Right.
And I remember he would just have some pedestrians and stuff, and they would have their hat on. So it was those 50s and 60s comics that started making me show how to lay things on a body.
I think I have one Eerie hardcover left. Let me see if I can find a good suit. There's some Ditko. Like I said, the Al Williamson especially. Here's some Gene Colan. There's a Gene Colan suit that looks very good.
Yeah.
And he's even very stylized in his suits. But
I'll tell you what, if there's ever anybody who I would call the consummate comic book artist, it would be Al Williamson. This is what it's supposed to be. Now, John Byrne on his She-Hulk run is where I started noticing that somebody was pulling a lot of fashion in there.
Yeah.
I mean, John Byrne made me notice weird high heel shoes with a strap on the ankle. I was like, where's he getting this stuff? I mean, he was dressing up She-Hulk to the tilt, pushing that stuff. I mean, I was just like,
yeah,
like John Byrne really channeling some stuff through She-Hulk here, man.
But that's what you have to do. Like I said, so many people, and that part always, they draw such exciting superhero stuff, and then they have to draw the regular stuff. It's just like generic shirt, generic pants, and it doesn't fit right, doesn't look right, because they're just knocking it out. They're not even thinking about what a shirt looks like. Meanwhile, all they have to do is nowadays look it up on the internet and draw that specific shirt, and it would be a lot better.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, art wise, a lot of the comic book stuff, and you can steer me away from this stuff, but the art wise is, I mean, that's one of the things that I've always like loved that comics sort of made me pay attention to. Other stuff outside of comics, but something shifted where it went from trying to like I said, figure out how clothes and stuff fit and draw that picture to where all of a sudden I started like seeing the black and whites and moods. I started liking stuff that made a mood, like the Nighthawk painting, you know, the Nighthawk. Right. Stuff like that. Why does it make a mood and stuff like that? Then I started noticing subtleties about people would like do a self-portrait, and the boring ones were just like a straight on, you know, looking at you, no expression. And then I started noticing there was little things artists would do that were like little cheats. They exaggerate the mouth being open just a little bit, the subtleties of it. It's like you're a comedian and you go from, oh, that was a funny joke, to where you're like, why is that a funny joke? You try to take it.
Oh yeah.
And to me, I started getting in my own head, and I was like, just draw something, damn it. Stop thinking. Just draw.
You can get some paralysis through analysis.
There we go. Okay. Nice. I knew you knew what I was talking about. I knew.
Yep.
All right. People have read Electra Assassin. They liked your story about Amanda Connor and Russ Heath. Second week in a row he's come up. Girlfriend was a fashion artist and taught him about the negative space. Love that stuff. I knew these things, but I didn't get names for them until like 1991. Oh, now something else I've kind of been doing since we're talking about art. I was telling you about how somebody used to have a YouTube channel, would be able to get a cover, send it to somebody, and they would have that cover turn into a poster. And you were like talking like the simplest thing. I've got a stack of comics here that I'm just kind of pulling out simply because of the cover, and I'm trying to figure out something to do besides just simply framing them. Do you ever have like books and stuff that you see that you just kind of leave out because you dig the cover? You know what I'm saying? Like you're like, damn, that's good. You know, just doesn't have anything to do with the book. Somebody's just done a fantastic cover.
I've actually on my last two not comic book haul videos, I've explained how I have a section of my comic book collection called Bought Just for Their Covers. And sometimes I'll buy a comic book just for their cover and put it in that section. What I do now is let me see if I can show it to you. Right over there, past my, it's just blocked by my Wacom tablet, is my printer. Right past and the top of my printer is flat. So, and I always have, that's where I put my comic books. That's where I put my comic books sometimes for their second reading, or else here is one. I've had this one just because I love this cover. I absolutely, let me take it out of.
Is that a Ramita?
That's
While
Ramita.
You're doing that, somebody asked me if I had the 100-page giant. It's not Strange Adventures. It's from Beyond the Unknown. It's actually in the stack of covers I wanted to show. I don't know how it got there. All right. Oh, that's awesome.
This is John Romita at work with all the women, he's drawn over the years. And there's back here. Which one? Whoops. That right there is the dragon lady from Milton Caniff, Terry and the Pirates, because John Romita was a huge Milton Caniff and Terry and the Pirates fan. There's his wife, Virginia Romita, who was my boss at Marvel, saying, John, where's that Marvel Age cover? And he's just, dreaming about all the women. And I just love this. I actually bought this just in the last few months because I never had a copy of it. And I've just always loved this cover because it reminds me of working at Marvel, of course. And it's got all those great John Romita drawings in it with a self-portrait of John and a portrait of his wife. So
I'll tell you
this
what,
is sitting out on top. My little area where I look at the covers is on top of my printer. And this is and every week, usually once a week, I go over to my Bought Just for Their Covers section, pull a new one out, put it in this Mylar, and leave it there for a week. And that's like my little museum piece that I look at for a week, and then next week I put a new, or whenever I feel like putting a new one out. But this is the only issue of Witchblade I ever bought, which is the last issue. and I only bought it because everybody's like, oh, last issues can sometimes. It was just one of those. Everybody, oh, the last issue of this. The last issues are hard to find. I'm like, there's a last issue right there because it came out that week. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to buy the last issue of Witchblade.
Let me tell you where that started. Yeah, it's
awesome. I like the cover.
That's a really cool cover too. I've sent you like I'm kind of wondering if they got a little Playboy and Tracy. I'm not gonna lie.
So this one has been out. Like I said, there's room for 2 comics side by side over there, and usually I also pile my comics that are going to be read the second time there sometimes too. But there's always one bought just for its cover comic sitting out.
I've got a few there. This right here has drove me nuts for years because I want to know the story behind it. How did this happen? You got, this is from this one's from the Bronze Age, the 70s. You go probably about 13 years later, and just randomly somebody does it with an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., Keith Pollard. There, I'm like, how did this happen? I want the story behind this. I don't care if it's dull. You see what I'm saying? That he didn't just homage it; they got it to where you can put them together.
Wow,
and,
I never knew that.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's stuff like this that drives me nuts. I just want to know.
I'm a big fan of that run of Deathlock, though, the original Deathlock run.
I've got to trade with that stuff, man. It was ahead of its time. It really
that was one of my favorites from childhood, and it still holds up to this day. It's just so good. And everything Rich Buckler gets accused of, swiping and copying from other artists, I forgive him. I forgive him all of that just because he did that Deathlock, just because I like that Deathlock so much. So I never say anything bad about Rich Buckler whenever someone's saying, I swiped from Kirby so much. He swiped from this guy. I'm like, Deathlock was really good.
Now, if there's ever, and this is another one of those covers, I mean, we know what it is. It's an homage to Sgt. Pepper. But I don't know if you've read Mike Allred's Rocket Red 7. But this was a book where I actually have a notebook, probably from like 1992. I kept a little journal 94. Yeah, I think it was about 94. I have a little journal here that I kept in basic training. And I came up with an idea of how to tell the history of rock and roll with a sci-fi. Now, it's the same idea, but nothing like this. This is superior. You know what I mean? I mean, like I bow.
Right.
But it blew my mind that Mike Allred did it. And he, you know what I mean? I was like, hey. I had this idea in the 90s. I got it documented. You know what I mean? But some of the artwork, Mike Allred just amazes me because he's one of those guys I was talking about. He's got so many rock and roll stars on there, and his artwork looks so simple, but it's dead on. You know exactly.
Yeah.
His caricature work just blows my mind.
He's a talented guy.
Yeah. And then I got these little one-shot issues here, like of Starman. I don't know what was going on with the series this time. It was winding down, but all of a sudden Keith Giffen and Peter David came in here and just did this one-shot story where Starman's going through the Earth, going through space, and he runs into Mon-El, and he runs into a Galactus-like character that's in the fashion from the Justice League run, back in the day. But this story is really cool because he explains how you can be flying through space and Mon-El and Starman hit each other in space. They're just flying along. And he tells a story about the first 2 cars in Ohio. They were the only 2 cars in Ohio when cars first started, and they met at a crossroads and wrecked. The only 2 cars in Ohio. And that's what I miss about writing. Those just acknowledge something and be like, well, it happened here. And it convinces you that it's possible. Little things like that.
If you ever want to read about the early days of cars, I recommend Walton Skizik's, the early gasoline alleys. Hold on, let me show you this.
Okay, what we got here? David McKenzie, listening to you two talk about decades of history of comics and the creators behind them. Perfect weekend. You're welcome. Appreciate that. Shirley Tim's Fun Bunker. Burns Lois in the dress before the party on Luther's boat and Man of Steel was amazing. What about all? David Loy in the original black and white V for Vendetta captured the mood you're talking about, Tim. Gorvidal is like nailing what I was talking about a minute ago. The Hernandez brothers also came to mind.
Yeah.
For covers, I buy Doug Wadley's Johnny Quest covers from Kamiko. I have almost all of those. I'm a huge, those older guys like Al Williamson, Doug Wadley and stuff. I love those guys. Gore Vidal, I reread Red Rocket a few weeks ago. This time around, it was while listening on Rewind Bowie Station to Station. Hunky Dory is my favorite David Bowie album. I have no idea why. He's got better albums, but that's the one I can listen all the way through. And Gamma Comics collectibles out there. And what were you saying, man? I was just kind of catching up there.
If you ever want to learn something of the early days of automobiles,
okay,
that is fascinating. First of all, I always said in my lifetime there's been 4 great comic strips: Peanuts, Doonesbury, The Far Side, and Calvin and Hobbes. Those to me are the 4 great comic strips. This is as good as them.
Alley.
Walton Skizik's, it's Gasoline Alley. The name Gasoline Alley is still copyrighted, but the original comic strips are in the public domain. So they published 5 or 6 volumes of them. This is from this is the first volume. January 30th. What year is this? 19. This is the later one. This is 29 through 30. The earlier ones are the early 30s. The early 20s. Pardon me. This is the late 20s. This is when it was really popular. But the name Gasoline Alley comes from, originally the strip was about, if you owned a car in the late teens, early 20s, you were basically a hobbyist because you had to take care of that car yourself.
Oh, I got you. Yeah.
And the Gasoline Alley were all these guys in the neighborhood who all had cars. They all parked their cars in this alley. So they all had little alley garages for their cars. So that's where the name comes from. And like I said, it's real interesting because our relationship to cars now is completely different than, like I said, they had to work on their own cars. There were hardly any roads. They would get flat tires all the time. They had to know how to fix a flat tire. The cheap guy would never fix his tires, and there's running jokes around the. But it's so interesting to read people's relationship with their cars in 1920. Just aside from the rest of it, that's really good. Just that is interesting.
See, I hear stuff like that, and I get fascinated. I love hearing that stuff because it makes me remember us kids when we had our bikes and we had to fix them ourselves.
Right.
You said fix a tire, and that took me back to where somebody would always have those kits, and we would always be scraping little chains together to keep the little kits. That was the glue in the patches. And then you have some kid coming over there being like, here's a trick. And he would you put the glue on the patch and he would light it. Everybody had a trick and stuff like that. So the whole thing about Gasoline Alley and stuff, I would have been one of those guys. That is fantastic. I love how that sounds awesome.
I'm actually building a bike right now in terms of my friend was getting rid of a bike. He's like, do you want this mountain bike? I'm like, oh, because I ride a road bike. I'm like, oh, I've never owned a mountain bike. I was like, hey, you know what? I kind of always wanted a mountain bike. Why not? And he gave it to me, explaining everything wrong with it. I was just like, I couldn't even pay attention. And then when I got home, I'm like, I've been working on it for a few weeks, but I keep having to order a new part or a new tool because there's just so much. The frame is good.
We were talking beforehand. I was like, I haven't, did biking in about 10 years. And though I grew up with bikes, the mountain bikes got heavy. And it was exactly what you were talking about for something that was supposed to have been rough and tumble and, supposed to be like a mountain bike. What you're talking about is exactly why I got out. I was like, this is getting too complicated. They started putting gears on them that were not like the gears. I can go on and on.
I've been, when I was a child and I got my first bike from wherever I got it from, Toys R Us. And you had to put it together yourself. My father showed me how to put it together, and I've been working on all my own bikes since then. But even with that, there's stuff I never done. Like the fork was off the bike, so I had to put I've never put a fork on a bike before because and what you have to, and I didn't realize there was a headset that comes with the fork. His was broken. He broke it getting it off. So it's like I had to buy a new headset for the fork. Then I got the headset for the fork. Then I realized the fork still had some old little part of the headset on that you needed a special tool to get off. I had to order that tool.
Yeah.
Then I'm like putting the fork back on. And the little plug that goes into between the handlebars to keep the fork and the handlebars on. Needed a special tool to get that plug in. I had to order one of those.
Yeah, cars started going this way, bikes started going that way. And I'll go ahead and tell you, like, at least going back to my day and stuff, the fact that you actually know the name of the parts, you're ahead of the game, man.
I just had to learn some of the names. I didn't know what a headset was before 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, you know, even in the early days of the internet and stuff, when I was into this stuff, you really couldn't find them. I knew there was one shop, and I'd be going in there and I'd be like, you know, it does this and it goes in here and it does, you know, it was unreal. Now, speaking of cars, Jim Steranko was good at drawing cars. Nick Fury's cars were 2 real models, although one of them wasn't a road car. Here's the thing about Jim Steranko, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But to me, Jim Steranko drew the best cars because shield cars would turn into flying cars. Yeah. I loved how it actually looked like it would work with the way he would have the tires go out under the car. It actually looked like it was functional in, you know, looking at it on the page, you know.
That just reminded me of a guy I used to know in the 90s who was an advertising artist. And he specialized, and some of those advertising artists really specialize. And he specialized in what they call compositions, which get done before so it's like when they're trying to figure out the ad they want to make, they need a comp artist to draw the whole ad before it went to an illustration or a photograph. And even within the comp artists, some comp artists specialized. And he was the car guy in New York City. He could draw a car, and for comps you use markers too, magic markers. He could draw a car from memory, full color with markers. That would just make you go,
"Yeah, son of a bitch."
How is that? Because he had done it so much, and he was the guy to draw marker comp cars. So it was just like, and you're like, for him, it was putting together a puzzle that he'd already put together 100 times. So it was just putting it together one more time. For the rest of us, it was like, I don't believe a human being can do that.
I almost feel like we knew the same guy because in my early 20s, I had an artist friend. We were in the same community college class and stuff. But the difference was if we were out at night, and he was the guy who could draw cars. I mean, he would take a paintbrush, one color, and just draw the car. He'd paint the car. I mean, worse than just drawing it in my eyes. But at night, if we were looking, you know, we were parked somewhere and hanging out or something, all you would see were headlights coming down the highway, and he could tell you what car it was by the shape of the lights. That's how into cars he was. And the guy, you look over there, and the guy would just be like scribbling with anything on a napkin or anything. You weren't paying attention, and he'd have like this fantastic car, you know, and it would tell you all about it. Turns out he used to do all sorts of models when he was a kid. And I don't know how it transferred, but doing the models in his head, he didn't just draw a car. He had like all the 3D blueprints in his head floating around. So he was trying to explain it to me.
Some people are like that. Like some people, I call it visual memory.
Yeah.
And some people have better visual memory than others. Like most people, if you ask them to draw Spider-Man, unless they've drawn him 1,000 times, the first thing they have to do is get a picture of Spider-Man to see exactly how his costume goes. And then you know, like when you're drawing him, then you look over and go, "Oh yeah, his mask is like that." Some people can just. I've seen people like who like I had this one roommate in college who he was a photography student and he could draw a little. But he had a tremendous visual memory because we'd be sitting there, we'd be talking about, this is, you know, before the internet too. We'd be talking about, oh, do you remember those, you know, I can remember him drawing those Muppets, the ones that went yip, 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 and swallowed their own face kind of thing. And we were like, oh yeah, remember and he's like, oh yeah. And he starts drawing them. And we're just like, and it looks exactly like them. We're just like, how can you, but some people are like, they have a visual memory where they see something from years ago and they can recall it and then draw it. And to me, it's just, to most of us, it's like, wow, that's a great visual memory. Because some people, they draw a costume once, and then they know how to draw it. But most, like I said, most most comic book artists, if you ask them to draw Batman, would have to look at Batman first, unless they're a Batman artist.
Oh yeah, there's characters I can draw back and forth just playing around with and stuff, and it's probably from that visual memory same. I tell you what, Jared, I'm going to ask you a question here because the last time this happened, it ended up taking 5 minutes to fix or less. I got work calling again. It is now an official Howler Mouse video. Welcome. You know, you think you can entertain them for like 2 or 3 minutes?
I think I can while you talk on that. Talk at work.
It is work. Sorry, guys. I'm an essential worker. So this is probably somebody needing medication. So give me just a minute here. Jared, I put you on the spot. Appreciate it. Be right back.
I'm going to pull a random comic off my shelf and let's see what it is. Hold on 1 second. Let's walk right over here. I close my eyes. And don't even know what it is. I'm going to take it out of the bag. Let's see what comic I pulled off my shelf randomly. What is this? Junior Carrot Patrol. Oh, wow. This is, everybody familiar with the Flaming Carrot? This is one of my favorite cartoonists, Rick Geary, who does these great books. Oh my goodness. I just looked at this bag. This bag is, I have to replace, this bag's getting, this is yellow. You probably can't even see how yellow this bag is. This is an original 80s bag. I replaced most of my 80s bags. I can't quite see how yellow it is on the screen because of the strong, but that's an 80s bag. That's got to go. Rick Geary does these little hardcovers. Beast of Chicago. They're true crime graphic novels. I love these. I got about a dozen of them over there whenever they come out. Yeah, murder story. That's right. He does these murder stories. But this was a one shot. Let's see what year this came out. Rick Geary is one of my favorite. I was 1990. Oh, pardon me. This is Junior Carrot Patrol #2. I didn't even realize that. So, nice little drawing on the back. So this number, I didn't even realize there were 2 of these. But some great, he does this sort of cartoony style. But he's a great story. I don't even know where I first heard of Rick Geary. He must have been in Dark Horse Presents, if this is a Dark Horse book. Because I used to buy Dark Horse Presents when it came out. If I remember correctly, his head turned into a carrot from reading 3,000 comics in one sitting. That was the Flaming Carrot's origin. I think the exact wording of it was he sat down and read 3,000 comics in a row and became simple. That was the Flaming Carrot's origin. The Junior Carrot Patrol. There's some dogs. Some dogs and cats. Well, this is like a 1990. Wow. But what year did Smells Like Old Newsprint? I think Dark Horse Presents originally came out in around 84, maybe. And I remember buying the first issue off the stands with Chris Warner's Black Cross on the cover. And then I bought all of Dark Horse Presents all the way to I think it ended with issue like 157. I bought it all the way to the end. I even bought volume 2 and volume 3 when they came out in the 2000s. But I think Rick Geary must have first come to my attention when he must have had some stuff in DHP. So I'm guessing that's where it came from. You know what, I'm just showing him. I pull the book off my shelf at random. And it's Junior Carrot Patrol #2 by Rick Geary, which is a Flaming Carrot tie-in.
Nice. I got a Flaming Carrot and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles with a Todd McFarlane cover.
Oh, yeah. I think I have that one, too. That was an issue of Flame. That was like Flaming Carrot 27 or something like that.
People really need to sit down and read about 3 issues of Flaming Carrot and then soak it in for a weekend or something there.
And it was still in a very yellow 80s comic bag. I want to change that out.
I cannot stand when they're all sticky and I get a black oil on my hands. It took me forever to figure out where the black oil was coming from when I was a kid. I'm like, black?
In the early 2000s, when I had a little extra money, I changed almost all my comics over into Mylar. But then when I got broke again in the mid 2000s, I stopped buying Mylar. So, but I still, I'm going to put this in a new poly bag.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and admit my Keith Giffen Justice League collection that I got month to month and all that stuff, and my John Byrne Superman are all in the same bags from the 80s. I've never switched them out.
Some of mine are too, but I think almost all of my Marvel childhood collection is now in Mylar.
Yeah.
And Mylar does make things look good. But now, the key is you have to buy your Mylar online, like from eGerber Direct.
Yeah.
And then it's cheap enough to get, because if you don't get it like online from eGerber, it's like twice the price.
Well, see, I've cleaned up on comic book bags. I've got two buddies who are changing everything that they have to Mylar, so I get their comic book bags that they bought like a year before. Boxes. I had a box. I had all.
You don't want this one.
Yeah. Now I've got something at random here. It popped in my head here. Okay. Mm-hmm. But I reached a point where I did something pretty lazy because it was cheap. I didn't feel like going through my boxes. Okay. I'm a guy, the reason I don't replace a lot of comics is there's a little setup here, But are you familiar with the story of The Little Prince?
Oh, I know its name. I can't remember what the actual story is right now. The Little
Prince is just to get through it. The Little Prince lives on his own little bitty planet with his rose, right? And something happens to his rose, and somebody's trying to talk him into just get another rose. He's like, no, that's my rose. That one rose is my rose. That's how I am with my comics. Any comic I've sold, had stolen, got rid of from when I was a kid, I really don't want to replace it because it's not my rose, even though there's dozens of roses. But for some reason, it came up on Facebook or something. Somebody asked me about Sam Keith, and they actually asked me, when did I discover Sam Keith? And I'm sitting here thinking I'm being the shit. And I'm like, oh, I knew him when he was an inker on Manhunter in 1988 or something, right? All of a sudden, I'm sitting here going, where is that damn book? And I refused to go through my comic book collection. I got on eBay. I found the first 6 issues for $2.80. Oh. So I finally reached a point where I'm not digging through my books. I actually got an eBay, and with shipping, it came to $4 for 6 issues of that Manhunter set, right? Do you have any books that you are like that? Even if you lost them, got rid of them, do you have anything to where you're just sort of like, that's not the one I had? You get what I'm saying? You follow me there?
I do. I don't know. I've rebought books over the years, so I don't think I care that much. I'm just trying to think of anything I rebought. Not a ton of stuff. Usually when I get rid of something, it's because I'm never going to look at it again.
Yeah.
But I did just run into a receipt. I'll tell you
are you serious? I can talk about. Go ahead.
A receipt that's been sitting around since the early 2000s from an order I put in at Mile High Comics in the early 2000s. Oh, you know what I did too? I'll tell you this. That is also the early 2000s. At one, I've gotten rid of I have so many comics over the years. You're out of room, so you go, what am I never going to look at again? And I get rid of them.
Right.
Sometime in the early 2000s, I discovered I got rid of a bunch of my Iron Mans from 87 to 110 or something like that. I don't know why I didn't think I got rid of them. And I'm like, the only thing that could have happened was I got rid. And it's not like someone came into my house and took those Iron Mans and left with them.
Right.
So I ended up ordering those ones at Mile High Comics. So those are ones I actually replaced because I got rid of them and didn't by accident or something. But around that same time, what I also did was I can remember some of the first Marvel comics I read. And often, and it's funny. I can all as a kid, and sometimes I can remember the first issue of Defenders I read was issue number 37, with Luke Cage walking up this plant with Plant Man throwing thorns at him. Those what is it? Those thorns may scare the other Defenders, but they don't scare Power Man or something like that. And I still have most of them. I still have my copies of, but they're old and battered. So I ended up of about like 8 or 10 comics like that, like my first Marvel comic of Defenders, my first Spider-Man. But what's funny too is sometimes I remember like the first issue of Defenders, and then when I first started buying it regularly off the shelf, and so there's like months in between. Like I remember that first issue of Defenders, but I didn't first start buying it till like issue 40 something. And so I ended up buying mint condition copies of these random 1970s Marvel comics just because that's how I remember them in my mind better than my battered old copy.
See, this is why I like when I have no idea how people listen to this. I'll be honest with you, right? But it's probably like the third or fourth time with you where I'm just sitting here just like, and I've done this with other people, you know, but I know exactly what Defenders book you're listening to because that was one of the first ones in the house. I can actually remember every wrinkle and corner bent on that issue. And I remember how the plants would throw thorns. And as a kid, right. I was like, I had some thorns in me. Don't get me wrong. You know what I'm saying? I grew up in the woods there. And I just remember going, ooh, that would hurt. You know what I mean? I was like, I got the pain from a simple little thorn that was popping off the plants.
So right next to my comics I bought for their covers is the My First Issue section.
Yeah. Well, see, you talk about mail order stuff here, right? And I'm just going to go, man. You just pop in whenever there, man. But one of the amazing things about the comics and the toys when I was growing up is that, I mean, I'm one of the first guys to say that as a kid where I grew up, it was cool. You could ride your bike, go out anywhere. It was still that era where kids would stay out and you would do stuff. But it really did suck because you didn't have you see things on TV or in movies and stuff, and you couldn't do that around here. There's nothing to do. It was a quieter time. You know what I mean? And one of the things that amazed me is that a subscription service through the mail or collecting those G.I. Joe points off the back of your toys, where if you got enough of them, you get exclusive toys. It was more about getting the package from somewhere out in the real world to remind you there's more than this town. And when you would grow up, you'd be like, I can see the world when I grow up. Growing up, I think only twice I went 3 hours away from where I lived. We never went anywhere. You know what I mean? Right. Drove me nuts because I was like, this is here. I'd see things in comics. I'd see ads. I'd see magazines. I'd see commercials. And I'd be like, can't we just go there? Well, we were freaking poor. You know, I was like, you get this stuff in the mail. And I'd be sitting there literally 5th grade. I remember when I got like this surfboard with a sail on it for G.I. Joe. It wasn't so much the toy and the blueprint, it's that I got a package that's not from here. I was like, there. And I always wondered if other little kids felt that way because my only other experience outside of my little bubble as a kid is I think it was Grit magazine or something. And I was like 7 years old. And I was going around a trailer park trying to sell Grit. Nobody was buying that shit. I'm doing this on my own, different era. You know, I didn't talk to the parents. I would just do this stuff. You know what I mean?
You actually tried to sell Grit?
Sell anything. Yeah.
You actually tried to sell Grit? I always wondered who did because I'd see ads for it in like Boy's Life or the comics or somewhere. Sell Grit. I never knew anyone who sold Grit.
That's what I mean. I mean, you know, I've talked a little bit about how I grew up and stuff, and you do your own thing. The parents were clueless. The stepdad smoked pot. You know, I mean, you know, he's just a burnout. You'd go outside, stay out of their hair. You know, me and my grandmother were like real close. So I started doing Grit. I picked up the phone and was like, maybe they won't see the bill. I didn't know how it worked. I was worried about making a long distance call and getting caught. But anyway, I ended up selling Grit, or tried to. For 3 weeks, nobody would buy a damn thing, but I never went out of the trailer park I lived in. So I called up Grit. And this is, like I said, I'm doing a 40-year-old memory. So you're getting the gist of it. This, you know, the way I remember it. But they scared the piss out of me They told me that I was under a verbal contract, and if I quit, they were going to sue me. And I'm 7
And you're a kid, right?
old, 7 years old, and I'm like, they got my address, they got my phone number.
Oh man!
If I had quit, I quit, and I never called them back. I never heard from them again, and I had
Talk about sleazy.
And I can't remember if I had the actual magazines or if they sent. There's a form for them to subscribe to it, but it seems like I had some samples, and I just never called them back. And I spent like probably the rest of that summer before I went into second grade, waiting for a subpoena to come in the mail because I saw it in a movie. I was waiting for some dude to walk up to me and like, "Are you Tim Mullins?" And I'd be like, "Who's asking?" At 7 years old, I was already had a plan. If some guy walked up to me and was asking who I was, because I saw it in a movie. I'm like, that's how they're going to get me. But yeah, Grit Magazine, I'm going on record. Grit Magazine threatened to sue me when I was 7 if I quit because I was under a verbal contract.
I've heard from other people that it was a bit of a scam, and they would like send it was almost like they would send you magazines and you'd have to sell them and you owed them money for the matter. I always thought you had to pay for the magazines first. So
I'm excited. It's a 40-year memory, and that's the only thing I remember because I was scared to death.
Right.
Okay? I mean, you're probably I don't remember. I can't remember. You know what I'm saying? But like,
yeah. You remember how they made you feel?
Yeah, yeah. But 7 years old, threatening to sue a kid. Right. You know, but if I was too honest as a kid, like I would tell wild little stories, exaggerate things, but I would not lie. Right. And it dawned on me when I was about in 6th grade, when people were like doing fundraisers for school, that I realized I could have lied and said it was for school. They didn't know what Grit was. I didn't. Right. I thought everybody knew Grit was on the back of a comic book magazine, so it never entered my head. I got older, saw people selling candy, and I'm like, man, I could have sold some Grit. You know, if I told them it was for school.
I can remember looking at those ads and wondering what the hell Grit was and who the hell was selling it.
I think I was going for the bike. There was a bike they had on there with a banana seat on it and a flag on it. Okay. I think I was going for the bike. You know, so I mean, you know. So yeah, I was that kid, you know.
Yeah.
And then I remember trying to decide if I wanted to try to get the Roman soldiers off the back that you could order, you know. Something like 500 Roman soldiers.
Once again, I never ordered any of those, but someone else told me it's like they were flat pieces of cardboard.
I never ordered it because every comic I saw that advertisement was like from 1973 or something. I mean, it's an old comic, and I would have to don. So I always wondered. I read Nth Man. I think was it Larry Hama or somebody wrote Nth Man, and Nth Man, a character had those. I think he had the army soldiers, and the artist actually showed you how they were flat and how they fit in the little box that came in because they were flat. And I was so relieved. That was the first time a comic book made me be like, I didn't miss out. You know, I was like, so. But yeah, Grit Magazine.
Mentioning Larry Hama's name, just the memories of it, just made me remember the Magub Gub song. I don't remember what comic it was in. I think Larry Hama was the writer of it, and he came up with a villain. This is early 90s, named Magub Gub. And so my friend Ed and I were working in the bullpen, pasting up whatever comic it was, and we just loved the name Magub Gub. And so as we're sitting there being bored, we made up a theme song for Magub Gub. How did it go? We love Magub Gub. He is our very best friend. We'll stand by Magub Gub till the very end. If you are in trouble and think that you are screwed, call on Magub Gub and he will rescue you. Magub Gub, Magub Gub, Magub Gub. And then Bobby Chase, who was the editor on the book, made us sing that to Larry Hama next time he came in. I wish I knew what book Magub. And just mentioning Larry Hama's name made that come back into my head. I hadn't thought about that in a long time.
Let me tell you something. I got an issue of Scout by Tim Truman, and I've got an issue of The Prowler by Tim Truman. And I got to show them to him, and he was so happy to see him. But they have flexi disc in there where him and some of his friends made those records.
I had those issues too.
I think you need to sing your Magub Gub and have somebody do some kind of
make a flexi disc.
yeah, and
Gub
make
gub.
yeah,
My gub gub.
here and send it to Mr. Hama there. I mean, that's
Yeah.
I'm sitting here like loving that, and I'm like, there's nothing I can do with it. You know, I'm willing to produce this for you under Howler Mouse Records. This is hilarious.
The McGub Gub theme song.
Oh my God, you made me forget what I was going to talk about. That's hilarious. Oh my God.
I don't know. You mentioned Larry Hama in the middle of it.
Oh my God, those G.I. Joe Larry Hamas, man, they were everywhere when I was a kid. Oh, something in '85 that happened. Okay, we were talking about stuff for like grit and stuff. Now I'm going down memory lane. Like I said, steer us away from it if you get there. But I had this friend in 6th grade. You go to middle school, and around here you had a whole bunch of little elementary schools. You get to middle school, and that's when all the kids from 5th grade and other schools get there, and you meet all these new people, right? And I'm pretty sure it was 6th grade because this was when Metallica with Master of Puppets was touring with Ozzy Osbourne. And I had a girl whose parents agreed to take me and they were going to buy the tickets. But I didn't go because the rumor was if you go to an Ozzy Osbourne concert, you're going to get stabbed with a hypodermic needle. And I believed it. I'm not going to lie. I didn't want to take the chance. But what happened was I walk into the gym and this guy, and he was like a pervert. This was like the first person I met that was a pervert. There's no doubt in my mind that this guy had a stack of Playboys under his house in the basement that he stole from his dad. I mean, this guy that's one of the reasons you were around him. He was so different. You just didn't know what pervert thing was going to come out of his mouth. I mean, it was, now that I'm older, I'm like, I just smacked my kid for being around him, right? But picture this, you get off the bus, everybody goes in the gym, everybody has their section by grades they're sitting in, and the whole place is full of all the kids in the gym up until about 8:30. I walk in, and the first thing I see is that he's ordered the X-ray glasses out of a comic book. You know what I'm talking about?
Yo, X-ray specs.
Right. So he's sitting there, but what's so funny is, first of all, I knew what he got. It was just bizarre. I mean, this was like a David Lynch movie before I knew David Lynch, because that's the feeling. Like, what the hell? He's just standing out of the crowd, sitting there looking around all disappointed. And I'm just sort of like, oh my God. So I walk up to him and I sit down. And before I even say a word, he looks at me. He's like, "They don't work. I don't see any boobies." I'm like, oh my God.
That just reminded me. Do you know? I read it. I borrowed it from my friend Bunch, who has everything. There was a book a few years ago that came out on the ads in comics. It goes through. It reproduces all those ads from 60s and 70s comics. Tells you what they were, who sold them, what happened to the company, who was behind it. Like there's like a little chapter on Count Dante. Remember him? He had his own little chapter. So it was a real interesting little book. It tells you all about the ads in comics. Don't remember the name of it, but I read it a few years ago.
Yeah, I'm gonna find it because it's faced that the greatest comic book ad ever is Wally Wood's Sea Monkey, not Wally Wood, Joe Orlando's Sea Monkeys. Joe Orlando's Sea Monkeys ad.
Count Dante.
Yeah. I got 1984 or 85. I got the Sea Monkeys and learned they were shrimp. I'm like, where's the little people? You know,
they're brine shrimp, right?
How they never got sued for that, I'll never understand. But everybody knows that ad and stuff, right?
Yeah.
They even had a TV show, a live action TV show that came out of those Sea Monkey people. Yeah, I've just always been, so I'm gonna get that book. But the ads in the comics, man, made the comics. I miss the days where everything about the comic was just there. The catalogs, the advertisements, like you're talking about, stuff you'd only see there. I would order the catalogs for their back issues with some companies, and it would be a folded over piece of yellow cardboard with like this digital print through them all, just listing off their comics and stuff. And that's why I stopped ordering things out of comics. I'm like, that's kind of disappointing. I
never ordered anything out of a comic.
Well, I pictured some guy in his apartment just sitting there with a stapler and one of those things to cut paper. You know what I mean?
I don't think I even knew it was possible as a kid for me to order something out of a comic because I was a kid.
Yeah. I was one of those. As a kid, I was more of a doer than I am now. There's a lot of years that just got me laid back about it. Like whatever. Like when I got my first subscription for Marvel, I ended up getting X Factor and Silver Surfer, but I think I ordered Fantastic Four and Avengers. I was like,
I used to get subscriptions for Christmas and my birthday, so I always loved them. Now mailed flat. I never knew what that meant because all of mine were mailed flat. I never. That's when I found out about subscription creases years ago. Because
yeah,
in the era when I was getting subscriptions from comics, they all said now mailed flat in the ad, and I was just a kid going, "What does that even mean?" Because my subscriptions used to come, it'd be a comic just like this in brown paper wrapped around it, which the comic could slide in and out of if you weren't careful.
Say that, yeah.
But what a subscription crease is, they used to fold it in half and put it in an envelope and mail it. But I never knew that. I just remember always seeing the now mailed flat and going, how? Huh? What is now mailed flat? I didn't know what that. I remember trying to puzzle out what now mailed flat meant as I was getting my subscriptions, and I never did.
7th grade, and I remember Poison, the band, was hitting big. So we're gonna go with 86 or whatever. I can pull the comic books and find out. But that's how I got my first Marshall Rogers, Steve Englehart, Silver Surfer #1 in an X Factor books. Came in those little slip cases. And I didn't realize that Marvel may have been the one folding them, but it was always the mailman. He would fold it over, roll it up, whatever, and shove it in the box with the rest of the mail.
Yeah.
So, me being me with my comics and stuff, this was nerve-wracking every month.
Oh, yeah.
To get a hold of somebody at Marvel subscription service, I might have wrote him a letter or something, and they actually wrote back and was like, talk to your mail
carrier.
Like, talk to them.
That's not us.
And I was just like, well, at least I was just happy they called back,
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. Subscriptions were a great thing when I was a kid.
Okay. What we got here? Everybody's talking about grit. Gorvidal, Bud Plant, and Mile High brought me the world and comics that I wanted, like Tim. I lived in a small Texas town as a provincial, as you can imagine. Provincial. Thank you. I've actually got a light here that shines right in my face, and if I look that way, I'm blind for a minute.
I turned off my overhead light when I'm on camera.
Oh man!
Otherwise, you guys will be blinded.
Well, I kind of like how we're randomly just going through memories and stuff like that.
Just going through stuff.
But one of the things I'm rereading, I've got in my stack here. I'm just kind of curious if anybody remembers this. But I don't know if you were like a Roy Thomas fan. It amazed me how many people couldn't stand Roy Thomas because of how many words he put on a page, if you will.
Yeah, yeah.
Actually, what I liked about him, I was the other way around. But you remember this little treat here? Justice Society of America?
I was not a fan of his DC work in the 80s. He did Justice Society. He somehow his love for, I liked his Marvel work in the 70s as Conan, as Invaders, but as DC, he did All-Star Squadron, he did Justice Society. I just found his kind of love for those. I didn't share his love for Golden Age DC stuff. I just found it very dry, so I didn't buy much of it.
See, I was the other way around, and it's probably my age coming into this, right? But yeah. I dug what I found out about Roy Thomas, and I've always wanted to talk to him about it. Are you good on time, man? You still want to keep going?
I'm fine.
But what I liked about Roy Thomas, and I think I've mentioned it to you before, I've met him quite a bit in early 2000s at Heroes Con and stuff, but Roy tells stories. You don't talk with Roy, you listen. Right. And it's fascinating stuff. I mean, it's not torture, not rude. The guy's just, you can tell he's a storyteller. But what I found out is that, he had a Golden Age collection. He worked at going around and getting those Golden Age books at old.
He loved that stuff.
Yeah. So here's this guy that's got all this knowledge about Golden Age books in ways you didn't really know a lot of. I think he was ahead of his time that way. He comes to DC. He gets handed his own section, all these World War II properties and stuff, and he made them fit together. And then into the back of the All-Star Squadron, he would sit there and run down the issues from the Golden Age and how all this stuff connected in his head and how he put it together. That's why I like the book. I mean, it was just, you talk about bang for your buck as a kid and getting like a comic book education. So that's why I thought this was like the stuff. I thought this is like, if you're in comic books, this is what you need to be reading. You're going to be learning stuff. You know what I mean? I mean, I totally got how it was a love letter, but he paced out that book really well, considering it's supposed to be a 4-year war, in World War II. And he would bring out characters I never heard of. Like, I remember, I'll never forget when he brought in the Freedom Fighters in the early 30s. But you open up the page and it looks like you got the Spirit running at you. And he goes through, it's a guy named Midnight who was a Spirit ripoff.
Ah.
That's what I mean. It was stuff like that where I was like, oh my God, this is really cool. So to me, I know it was a love letter for that era that he did and stuff, but he had all these characters and he fit them in and paced them out really well. I think All-Star Squadron's really underrated, but that's why I was surprised when I found out people had a problem with Roy Thomas and the way he wrote and stuff. I just thought it was really cool. And
the letterers used to complain about him.
Really?
Yeah, because he wrote so much, there was more work for them. When you had a letter of Roy Thomas page, it could take you a while.
Man. Yeah,
that just reminded me, you mentioning Eisner ripoff. I just flashed on. Do you remember a comic from the 80s? Who put it out? For The Masked Man? There's a comic I used to collect called The Masked Man, who's a spirit. I guess you'd call him ripoff, but it was obvious. It was the guy obviously loved. Can't remember who did it. Boyer, was that his last name? An artist I only know from that one series. Eclipse put him out. That was who it was. He may have appeared in like the Eclipse monthly magazine first, and then he had his own series for, I don't know, 5 to 10 issues maybe, called The Masked Man. I just remember liking it. I haven't looked at it since then, but they might still be on my shelf.
I'm going to reserve the right to correct myself here later, but I never read the book. But there's this kid. All right, he's got a little bit of a tragic story. I'm in 7th grade. I'm in my room, just playing around, doing whatever. And my mom worked at a hospital in the cafeteria. And I had no idea what was going on because this was really out of the blue. But she busts through my room without knocking and goes, there's this kid, and you're going to go meet him, and you're going to be his friend, and he's in the comic books too. Okay? And I'm like, okay. And it was a nurse's son. We're in the car, and I'm just sitting here like, what the hell is happening? And we drive across town, and I'm just dropped off at this trailer, and my mom leaves. And I'm just sitting here on this porch. This guy named Robbie, he's my age, a kid named Robbie, and his mom just opens the door, and she was like, hi, Tim, come in. And I'm just sitting here like, what the hell? I don't know these people. So I go.
Play dates weren't invented until sometime in the 90s, so it's foreign to us.
Well, you'll see how this story comes together with what you just said, right? I mean, you just took me back. This is how I met Robbie. I just cut him out of my life about 2 years ago. Finally, it's been that long, right?
Wow.
So I go into this trailer, and I'm just sort of like, what the hell? I'm really wondering if am I going to be living here now? I'm like, what just happened? So I go on back into his room. She just points me, and Robbie's just sitting there on the floor, and the tragic part of this is that about a year or two before this, his dad had shot himself while he was in the trailer. I didn't know this.
That's why Robbie needed a friend.
I guess. Right. So I was volunteered because I read comic books. So I go back there, and he's got his little room. He's got all these books. And the first 2 books he shows me, he's a huge Neil Gaiman fan. He actually shows me his rejection letters from some comic book company. He got another one from Dark Horse. I mean, he was awful. I mean, he had a dream, man. He was a dreamer. But anyway, the first 2 books he shows me is this Neil Adams Skate Man, and I think the Mystery Man you're talking about, the first 2 books. And I'm just looking at that like, what the hell have I walked into here? I'm like,
I'm going to walk over to my shelf and see if the Masked Man is here. Let's see. The massive. There he is. Now, in his own book, Eclipse, I was right on that. Looks like he still have the 80s bags on him, too.
Somebody's asked me about a question here. What is this? The Masked Man.
The Masked Man. Let's see who did it.
What's the year on that?
This is 1984.
That could be the very book he showed me.
B.C. Boyer, is that his name?
No. Robbie and you are the only 2 guys I know that's ever even had that book.
Yeah. BC boy, and you can see Will Eisner and the Spirit in it
Oh wow.
because he was just a guy. Whoops, with glasses. Lasted quite a few issues here. Oh, and in the back, oh, this I always liked. Do you remember Johnny Nemo?
Yeah.
That was some nice, stylish stuff.
Yeah, just from like the advertisements, like that and stuff.
Right.
One
Paradax.
One of the first obscure books I got into, and I think it was because of Robbie, was Continuity Comics Armor. Okay?
Armor.
I still have those books. I got to ask a question here. Is Satellite Justice League the best Justice League issues?
I have no idea. Not being a Justice League fan.
I mean, they're fun. They're fun. Anything with a JSA JLA crossover is awesome. And Roy Thomas actually co-wrote a story where they fixed continuity with Black Canary, how she went from Earth 2 to Earth 1, how she was able to be so old, and they got into the Thunderbolts. And George Perez did those covers, which were amazing. Probably like around 216, 217. I think the satellite era is the most popular one because they had a satellite. Yeah, and a lot of people have pulled from that. I don't know if it's the best Justice League. I think it's just a matter of taste.
Masked Man lasted 12 issues. That's a pretty darn good run.
I'm sort of curious, but I don't want to make the investment, you know.
I haven't read them since the 80s, so I couldn't even tell you. Like, all my opinions that are over a decade old, I consider expired. And I remember liking The Masked Man, but like last time I read it was 1986. The past is another country, Tim. They did things differently there.
That may be, yeah. Hold on.
Albert Bailey, Butcher from Paris, from Dark Horse is good. Reading it. Last issue delayed. I read the first issue and I kind of liked it. But I kind of didn't. It kind of moved a little too. I wanted it because, first of all, I like history. So history comics are right up my alley. But it moved a little. I found the plot moved a little too fast for me. But I was buying quite a bit of comics in January. So it was also like I didn't need another comic. If I'd only. I was buying like 9 comics a week in January. It was like a peak time for me for some reason. So if it had come during a 4 comic week, maybe I would have added it to my pull list. So I don't want to say I didn't like it because I kind of did.
Well, I can name many books back in the day that my friends at school and stuff were into, and I just didn't get it. And I'm one of the first people to tell you that I did not get the X-Men until like 86. And people were always like,
well, most people didn't. I was just, I can't remember who I was telling this to, because I started, my first issue of the X-Men was 102. And my first issue buying it off the stands was 108, the first John Byrne issue. And that was the perfect time for a kid to start reading the X-Men, was the first John Byrne issue regularly. And it was only a cult hit while John Byrne was on it. It wasn't big. I can remember it had only gone monthly shortly after John Byrne got on. And there was let's just say I knew 10 comic fans. I don't even know if I knew that many. Only 2 of us were reading it. And trying to convince other comic fans to read it, you couldn't even. They weren't even interested in the X-Men. So the X-Men, the sort of the best glory years of the X-Men, that Byrne Claremont stuff, was only a cult hit. It wasn't even a real hit yet.
The X-Men, getting started in the X-Men, I think it's an interesting story. But my first issue of reading the X-Men, probably around 79 or 80, probably was the Stepdad's number 3 with the introduction of the Blob. Okay. 60s. He had it in the house. We actually had a spinner rack in the house. He had a bunch of Silver Age Marvel books. And then the next time that I can actually remember reading an X-Men wasn't even an X-Men book. I think it was Cracked Magazine took an issue of the Dark Phoenix saga and they put their own dialogue in it. All right. So I'm just sort of like this, I'm comparing the X-Men not quite getting the time jump, and all this stuff. But then I would walk around the trailer park that I lived, and there was like this path between the woods that would put you on another street. And there's this kid who was older than me, probably about 13, 14 or 15. His name was John. And he just started talking to me as I was like running around the woods, walking around the neighborhood, trying to find somebody to play with. And he was a huge Dark Phoenix X-Men fan. And somehow, as a little kid at 7, you're talking to this older kid, which is cool. We would sit in his driveway about once a week, and he would explain X-Men comics to me. He eventually ended up giving me a picture he drew on this green cheap art paper you get from school of Cyclops coming out of the rubble. And I'm not exaggerating. This kid was probably like about 14, 15, whatever. He was ready. If he really drew that Cyclops picture that young, I'm like, this guy is ready. It was like Neil Adams, like,
wow,
well done. And you couldn't trace through this paper. It was this green pulpy paper. And I never saw the image before. So the X-Men, I actually got an education from this kid that just knew everything about Claremont and Burns' X-Men. He even wore a tank top.
Is your girlfriend distracting you again?
Yeah, and she's smiling about it. It's gonna be a good day.
This is why Tim can't get anything done.
Well, you saw me trying to paint pictures.
Yeah. Okay, John Jones asked me, what's one of your favorite memories from working with all those greats? Well, most of my favorite memories are from the people who aren't great. I'd say, being that I was one of the behind the scenes bullpen guys, most of my favorite memories are from the other rank and file guys. But of course, got to work with John Romita all the time. He was in the office, so he was one of the greats, and some of the others who were around. But most of my best memories are, like I always describe my bullpen days as a terrible job, but a great experience. Because the job itself wasn't that, you're getting all the stuff ready to print. It's not that terribly an interesting job. But it was a great, it was about 3 or 4 years ago at a con, I was talking to Carl Potts, who was an editor in the 90s with me at Marvel. And he was telling me, and this is like, I don't know, it was one of the New York City Comic Cons about 5 years ago, maybe. And he was telling me how it had fallen through, but him and Tom DeFalco, who was the editor-in-chief sometime in the 90s, and what's his name? Hobson, who I didn't know him, but he was the publisher at Marvel. They wanted to write a book on how, if you want your company to be fun, it has to come from the top down.
Yeah.
It can't come from the bottom up. It has to come from the top down.
Yeah, leadership.
And at that time in the 90s, someone look at a Marvel comic and look who the publisher was in the 80s and 90s. His last name was Hobson. And he was very much invested in sort of the story of the Marvel bullpen being, the story that Stan Lee created about the Marvel bullpen being a fun place, which didn't necessarily exist, but that was Stan Lee. He was very invested in that story. So he wanted that. So the Marvel bullpen in the 90s was a very fun place. You have to imagine, like, there were artists coming and writers coming and going all the time, but they didn't work there. But the day-to-day people who were doing, like me, who were doing the production job in the bullpen, all creative people, and we were allowed to talk all day. So it was always fun because you got 20 people in a big room at drawing tables doing the work that's kind of mindless and just talking, talking like you and I right now, except there's 20 of us. So that was when I say it was a good experience, it's because of that atmosphere that I remember. And, and I'm friends with, and also working in comics was different than working in another job because you all had comics in common. Even the people, like you go to work and there's people you don't like. Any job you go to, there's people you don't like.
I'm that guy.
Even at Marvel, you go to the job, there's people you don't like, but they're at least they're comics fans.
Yeah.
and also the people you at most normal jobs, there can be somebody who you go to and you're either friends or friendly with, but really what you have in common is the job.
Mm-hmm.
And when that person or you quit that job, you never hear from them again.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily true working in comics because you still have something to talk about besides the job. You have comics to talk about. So someone may quit in this day and age. You hear from most people through Facebook too. I'm still talk regularly on Facebook with a lot of these people. We still talk back and forth because even though, which doesn't happen at a regular job where all you had in common was the job. So in that, it was a very good experience. And like anything that pops up as I'm talking to Tim here, I'll tell you if it's a good memory.
Okay. I like how we just sort of bounce off of the memories here. You'll say something and it'll come up.
Yeah, we got comics in common, so we can talk for long periods of time.
Roy Thomas's retcon for Black Canary's age was not the best idea. Basically, her mind was put in the body of her daughter, who had been erased from everyone's memory.
Yeah.
That was an interesting story. I don't know if I'll do a video on it or something. If I had the books out, I'd look at it. But I think that story came out when I was 10. And when they did the mind switch, I actually was like, does this mean she's in love with her own dad? I mean, honestly, in my head. And I just moved on.
That's actually that's the kind of continuity stuff I was never into at Marvel and DC, which is why I'm an indie guy too. There's plenty of people who really embrace that continuity and it's like he's got an opinion that his retcon. My opinion on all retcons is they're bad. I mean, that's just it's like, I don't like any of them. I don't like the whole idea. I was never into the idea that you have to explain everything.
That's the one criticism I'll agree on with Roy Thomas is that not everything needs to be fixed because you noticed it. You know what I mean? He did come off like there was a bit of an obsession that nobody that felt like we're really worried about it.
And he's not the only one. Yeah. You know, the only writer was like that. I read Eric Larson said this once, and I'm of the mind that Eric Larson said all continuity is believing that all this stuff happened to one person.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm okay with that. That's all continuity is to me. I just have to believe that all this stuff happened to Savage Dragon, that it was one guy. Well, now it's two guys since his son took over, but I have to believe all this stuff happened to Spider-Man. That's all it is. And sometimes when some people really want to know the nuts and bolts of it. There are plenty, and that's why retcon. And I'm not saying that's not a legitimate approach. I'm just not into that approach.
Okay, I'm shooting from the hip here. I'll see if I can explain, bounce off what you're saying. But like, there's a suspension of disbelief. Okay,
right.
Characters who've been around since the 30s, 40s, all the way up. You got all these strips, all these comics, sequence. You know, the numbers. They get up to like 300, 400. All this stuff happened to them, no problem. I think actually trying to acknowledge that all this stuff happened to him and bringing up the continuity will break that sometimes. It's kind of like if you hadn't pointed it out, nobody would have noticed or thought about it. You're worried about something that everybody has accepted that these are fictional characters, but you have stuff you can pull from the past, villains they fought, whatever. You know what I mean? And you can be honest with it, but then it's when you try to act like it's the real world, now you're bringing up things nobody was worried about. Does that make sense? You broke the disbelief because you pulled the curtain yourself.
Right.
We know these are fictional characters and they've been around forever, but why bring it up? Why try to make sense of it?
Right. That's what the making. Some people enjoy the making. John Byrne loves to make these things try to make sense.
Yeah.
Roy Thomas loves to try to make, and there's fans too who like when they try to make it sense. I'm just not one of them.
Yeah. Well, okay, there we go. That's why I like the All-Star Squadron. He brought a bunch of characters that came out around the same time period with different companies. That's why it was fun. How can these guys work together? But then you can go like into some of his Doctor Strange stuff he did in the 90s or something after he left, or even his Young All-Stars where he tried to fit in stuff with the Crisis. That's the stuff that's the mess. That's the stuff where I'll be on board with you being like, And it wasn't real necessary. You know what I mean? Just whatever.
Mhm.
I'm seeing if there's any more comments, man. I'm starting to get all juiced up here, man.
The caffeine is kicking in, and your girlfriend with the tank tops walking around.
The tank top did it, but yeah. Now it's like it took me 2 hours to get warmed up. I'm like, let's go, man. Let's go.
Like Helen Hunt searching for tornadoes. That's what tank top brought to me. She was running around in a tank top. What was the other one? Jodie Foster in The Panic Room.
Oh my God. I walked out of that movie I think I forgot it 10 minutes after I left the theater.
I forgot that movie as soon as Jodie Foster put a shirt on over her tank top. I was like, oh. That's why I was paying attention.
You see, this is how, I'm not saying messed up, but this is how I work. Like, you can tell me that, and I'm like, no, sir, you need to see Ellie Mae in the Twilight Zone where she's running away from the messed up faces people. That's hot. You know, I'm like, you know, go back to the 60s, you know, but oh my God. All right. So I'm going to bring this up. Does anybody remember Tales of the Gold Monkey?
I remember it. I remember watching it a little and then not.
Did you murder another plant? I'm gonna tell your tulip story here in a minute. Yeah. Anyway, back in this show here, the reason I'm bringing it up is that I kind of might want to warn people not to buy this after I tell them how great it is, how funny it is. You got to remember, it's 1982. It is a made-for-TV movie. It's probably got the same production value as Fantasy Island or something, right? But this was inspired by Indiana Jones. This is the closest you're going to get to something inspired by an Indiana Jones movie, right? It's really good. The problem is there's something about the disc. They put them on discs that are so cheap, so thin or something that it won't work in a DVD player or a Blu-ray player. I have to put it on the computer to watch it. Okay. So my thing is that what I'm bringing up here is that are there any TV shows that they don't have to be comic book shows that you can remember or want to tell people to buy because it might as well have been in a comic book? You follow what I'm saying? Steranko worked on Indiana Jones. It's led to the Golden Monkey. That's one of the things I've always liked and I've talked about is how you will like things that have nothing to do with comics. It seems very cool. And then as you all of a sudden you find out comic book people worked on it. Plug, Steranko did so much stuff behind the scenes with movies. Is there like anything you can think of that was cool that you found out later comic book people worked on?
Bluntzilla just mentioned that Mike Plug worked on John Carpenter's The Thing. I just heard that this week.
Oh yeah, I've known that and stuff like.
I may have known that 2 or 3 times over the years, but I forgot it.
Mike Plug is that guy that I could not believe how many movies I liked from when I was a kid. Come to find out that he worked on them. Wizards, Ralph Bakshi stuff, The Wizards, Lord of the Rings, all the stuff that I was like into. And then I would like see his comic book work and wonder whatever happened to this guy. I was a kid who thought he just disappeared. I thought he worked in comics during the 70s and just disappeared in obscurity. And all of a sudden he's in all these movies that I have like bootleg VHS tapes of and stuff.
See, Fenner27 just asked me, what comics do you buy now, current or old? I actually have my own channel. You put my name in, Jared Osborne. You can find it where I do my pull list every week. But I'm mostly an indie guy, and I buy new stuff. I hardly buy any old comics. I mean, I'm not a back issue hunter or anything. Never really have been. But since I've been buying comics every week for 40-something years, all my, old comics are now back issues. But yeah, I'm an indie guy. I buy all sorts of stuff.
Well,
and I usually, as an indie guy, I follow creators rather than comics. So it's like Terry Moore.
People also need to know you make your own shelves for these books.
Yes, Stan Sakai. Where am I? Let's see if I can turn this. There's some comic book shelves over there. There's one of my drawings. There's some more comic book shelves.
So it's not just that you follow the creators and get the indie books and do all that stuff, but you make shelves as you go along. Mm-hmm. All right. The Equalizer series from the 80s appealed to me because of John Grell's Joe Sable Freelance. Now, again, I'm going to kind of go off the racks here. He kind of took me where we were. But there was a bunch of shows in the 80s that I always wish somebody could have made this big crossover by the end of the 80s.
They made a John Sable freelance show.
Yeah. But you had Manimal, Automan, Misfits of Science, stuff like that. And in my head, I always wanted to see like this big TV movie where they all meet in my head.
Who was the guy in the 70s who could turn invisible for a minute?
Oh, I actually kind of remember that. But you made me think of the Man from Atlantis, because actually, that show you're talking about, the guy being able to turn invisible, would come on after him, at least for one night that I remember. And then you had an old TV show called Cliffhanger that failed miserably, but it was cool. They started out with 3 or 4 stories, and I remember one of them was a Dracula story. And as they would all end in the cliffhanger, one story would end, the other 2 got bigger until they got to the last one. And that was the talk of the town back then.
I once knew a woman who named her dog Briscoe after the Briscoe County Junior show. I was like, you're the one fan of that show, huh?
Yeah. I'm like, just because Bruce Campbell was in that show is the only reason that show survives, in my opinion. I mean, even Young Indiana Jones, the show was awful, and that was just an excuse for George Lucas to play around with computer graphics for his movies. Somebody brought up Voyagers. How do I like Voyagers as a kid? I saw Time Bandits, and then I saw Voyagers. I was all about that show, Voyagers. I got to rewatch it in the early days of YouTube. Somebody uploaded a bunch of them. I don't know what the hell I saw.
What it was that was the closest we could get to any kind of science fiction in those days.
I mean,
I remember liking the Logan's Run TV show.
I never got to see that one, but
it is not very good. I rewatched it a while ago, where I tried to. It is not very good. I remember liking it at the time because it was the only thing on. It was the only sci-fi on. There was no good,
I don't know what Voyagers came on. It might have been like a Sunday or something. But I remember having my whole day planned around making sure I was home to watch it. I mean, I absolutely loved it. Buck Rogers was the same way. I thought Hawk on Buck Rogers was the shit, right? I got to rewatch it when they released it on DVD, and all of a sudden it really is a guy just putting on a skull cap with feathers, and I'm just sort of like, what did I see?
Was Voyagers the one with the guy who accidentally killed himself?
No. The actual actor did, I think.
Yeah,
the actual actor.
Eric Hexelm or something like that.
I don't know, but that guy had a future, man. He was really good on the show. I mean, I don't want to like put down the actors and stuff. It was like the storylines and the execution.
Right.
But for people who don't know, the Voyagers was one about, there's these time travel police sort of, and they wear poofy shirts, shirts and stuff.
And one was a kid.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to say. And they would have like, I can't believe I'm going blank what it is, but they had a pocket watch. And when they landed in an era, if you had a red light, you had to fix history. A green light, it means everything was fine. And I think the guy had a name like John Cornelius or something. It reminded me of a Philip Jose Farmer character for some reason.
Phineas Boggs.
That's it. Yeah.
I remember that only because for some reason I used that as a fake name whenever I had to fill something in for years. And I had no idea where I got it from till someone told me that was the character's name on Voyagers. I was like, Phineas Boggs. Because I would just, like in the early days of the internet, when you had to put your name in, I just put in Phineas Boggs.
Yeah, mine was Grimfinkel Foss, and I'm always trying to figure out where I got that from because I know I didn't come up with it. But anyway, So in Voyager, he ends up losing a book or something. I don't know. The Greatest American Hero lost his book, his instruction book. Right. I might be crossing over, but something happened where this guy didn't know history very well. So he meets a kid with curly black hair and a red striped shirt, and this actually is Punky Brewster's older brother in real life. Go figure. And he ends up taking the kid through history and stuff like that by accident because the kid is a history nut. And he's the one telling him. And the episode that killed me is they met, was it Thomas Edison? Anyway, they lost the pocket watch, and this famous inventor had took it apart and told them don't touch it or he can't put it back together. That tore me up as a kid. I'm like, they're stuck. Yeah,
and the lead actor in it, the show ended because the lead actor was fooling around one day with a prop gun, and he put it up to his temple. He was pretending to kill himself, but he pulled the trigger, and the wadding from the gun hit him in the temple and killed him.
I kind of remember that. It kind of freaked me out when you learned that. Yeah, I learned that in a sci-fi TV magazine in Magic Mart that I didn't even buy, and that kind of freaked me out a little bit. I didn't know that's what happened. Space 1999 continues to impress me to this day. Space 1999 has an interesting history because there's a Gary Anderson show. I'm going by memory here. Gary Anderson show had a show called UFO that got canceled, and they ended up using the sets and the props for Space 1999. So
I was so bored by Space 1999 as a kid. Oh, I couldn't watch it.
They're on YouTube for free, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a show towards the end. That you had there's a bunch of live action shows like that were on CBS back in the day. Something about Jason and the Ark. Oh man, I'm gonna go blank on those. But Space 1999, I can't figure out why that has such a huge following. I might have to revisit that one.
I always hated it as a kid. There were a couple people at Marvel who were big fans of it. I was always like, really? You like that show? Yeah, they were fans of it. They loved it.
Yeah, and then
they're like, the second season wasn't as good, but that first season was great. I'm like, all right. Staple gun weapons.
Oh my God. Fefner 27 here says on Voyagers, the young kid was on the Bad News Bears TV show with Corey Feldman. Now, I loved the first Bad News Bears. In the 70s, I based my whole life on trying to be one of those kids. I can admit that. I can look back and be like, that's what I was doing. But when the TV show came on, here's why I quit watching the TV show. There's an episode.
I don't remember the TV show. I might have never watched it.
I remember watching, but I remember the episode that I quit watching. At the end of it, Corey Feldman jumps on the floor around a bunch of kids, and he's like, oh, cool. It's Fleetwood Mac in concert. And I hated Fleetwood Mac. And I was like, I'm done. I'm done.
Fleetwood Mac ruining my TV show.
I'm like, no kid listens to Fleetwood Mac. This is
was that the 80s that the Bad News Bears TV show was on?
I think it was the late 70s. I think we're talking 79.
I don't remember it at all.
Yeah. Hey, man, I'm Generation X. I was a lock and key kid. There's a lot of TV watching when you couldn't go outside, you know.
I was outside playing most of the time.
But Bad News Bears, oh, my God. Yeah, Bad News Bears, Kelly was the stuff. So when Kelly from Bad News Bears ended up playing Rorschach, I'm like, this is cookie cutter made for me. They just my life just went full circle. You know, I'm like, it's over. We peaked. I'm done. Oh, man. Well, that was fun talking about old shows. But basically what I watch all the time are the Twilight Zones from the 80s and Twilight Zone from the 60s, that 70s show, and Night Court. I think those are in Supernatural. I think those are the best shows ever made. You know, kind of stuck a little bit, you know, what I watch now and stuff. Oh, man. Well, Jared, it's been 2 hours. I got a room in there for some people watching TV, and I haven't ate anything, but I like shooting. We need to do this again, and maybe we'll have a theme next time. But this was fun.
Okay.
Hip. I'm impressed people stuck around. I'm not going to lie. And I got and I got a few here. Yeah, I got a few minutes here after this, so it's no biggie here. But thanks for everybody popping in. And as Jared said a minute ago, go check out his channel. Put in Jared Osborne.
Yep.
All of us were in love with Tatum at the time. Yes, we were. Yeah, she's the girl from the Bad News Bears. Awesome, man. All right, guys. Thanks a lot. Be excellent to each other. Go subscribe to Jared Osborne here. And I usually binge his stuff about once a month, like I do with most people I watch.
See what comics I bought, even though none the last 2 weeks.
Well, your thing is you do those real quick ones on Instagram and Facebook or something. That's where I get my info on you. So, all right, guys, thanks a lot. We'll definitely you up for doing this again sometime? I mean, we got a name for the show that kind of happened on its own.
Sure.
All right, later, guys.